Nigeria has conducted its 7th general election since 1999, and there are, as always, lessons for us to take away from the exercise. From the lead up to the first round of elections on February the 25th to the events of March 18th, the 2023 election season has thrown up several important conversations. The security aspect of the elections remains one that we will continue to dissect for some time to come. In previous election cycles, security agencies have been implicated in or accused of partisan enforcement, sustained allegations that they have engaged in electoral violence at the behest of politicians or looked the other way while thuggery erodes order have not gone away. The 400,000 plus security personnel deployed for the presidential election were once again deployed for the gubernatorial elections. My first guest is a security expert and fellow of the Nigerian Institute of Industrial Security, as well as the managing director, PR24 Risk Management Consulting. Adekoya Onyekachi joins me now on Politics HQ. Adekoya, welcome to Politics HQ. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me, and good evening to the viewers.
So let's start by looking at the the variance in the levels of violence that we saw in the elections that held over the weekend. INEC staff, both regular and even ad hoc, were victims of the violence. We also saw, of course, intimidation, abduction, harassment of INEC staff. We saw ballot box snatching, assault, harassment, and intimidation of voters as well. In a report released before the elections, the Center for Democracy and Development said there were some 109 deaths from January the 1st to March the 3rd, all tied to the elections. So were you expecting this level of violence to play out when it came to the state level elections?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. If you looked at how the presidential election has shaped up, and in the run up to the election, the governors had invested a lot of political capital in determining who becomes president. And for the PDP, you saw the G5 governors on the one hand, and the APC, of course, you saw what happened and what played out in the APC presidential primaries. So it was clear that the governors had made for themselves new friends and new foes, and some realignment would be needed post the presidential elections. Now, once the presidential elections had been taken care of, what you then had was a tough war, as it were, for some governors, for example, like the Delta State governor, and even the Rivers State governor. Their political relevance and existence was pretty much on the line. So given other local variables and other local conditions, we had projected and anticipated that the gubernatorial elections would be, of course, the most keenly contested and, again, fraught with violence. So
yes,
I would say it was expected and anticipated.
All right, so we saw places like Lagos, Rivers, which you've mentioned already, Benue, Abia, Bauchi, Kaduna, and even Kano were flagged as major hotspots for potential violence before the elections. And we've seen that events during the elections have largely borne that out. And then other states, of course, we saw flashpoints. And even now, there's a curfew in place in Kano. There are still ongoing situations. When it comes to determining what will be an election hotspot, I want you to take us through what security experts like yourself look for in sort of raising the flag that, hey, this is a place we need to pay attention to. This is a place we may need to deploy extra security to.
Okay, that's fine. So you then look at data and intelligence. So when you look at data, you bear in mind that man is a creature of habit, and data can be predictive. It can be indicative. Data, of course, in its very raw form, is just an observation of what has occurred. So when you look at data itself, the type of incidents occurring, the areas they occur, and how they occur, you then use that to chart a trend, to do a bit of a trend analysis. Again, the data in itself is not just the only guide to your decision. You have to then factor a number of things as to what's driving the data count and what's causing that spike in those areas you're observing. And so that's on the one hand. how you determine what an hotspot would be. Then you then look at the other geopolitical considerations. You look at the known actors, you look at the levers of power, you try and assess whose interest is at stake against which other party's interests. And you then look at the body language, you then delve a bit into human intelligence, what the feelers are from the source, effect of contest and of unrest. You can then sense, yeah.
Okay, so I asked that question for a very specific reason. So let me go now into that reason. So you've listed out how we would expect security experts and even state security agencies from the highest most level to even just local levels to sort of flag a place as a hotspot. And then the next question would be, what should the anticipated response from the security agencies been? So when we see that, whether it's independent security observers like yourselves and others who have put together these reports and said, these are places we believe will be prone to violence, what should we have seen in how our security agents also handled these hotspots? Because a lot of people have said this violence that we saw over the weekend was predicted, as you've shown us as well. It was predicted. We knew it was coming, but the response has been very questionable.
Well, in terms of response, I'm not sure what we had expected the security forces to do. If you take, for example, the 176,000 polling units thereabouts, if you put 2 policemen per polling unit, that gives you 300 and something thousand already. Then you have to man the borders of Nigeria. You then need to have tactical teams deployed at strategic points. You have the issues of Nigerian army faced with terrorists in the northeast, operations in the northwest, north central. As a matter of fact, the Nigerian army has operations in over 31 states. They also don't have all the logistics they require. For a battalion group, there are certain minimum number of A vehicles and B vehicles you should have, averaging maybe 80 vehicles for the B vehicles and maybe 40 for A vehicles. So logistics is a problem for the army. Logistics is a problem even so for the police. Then munitions and the rest. So the honest truth is that given the current issues, we had already said that the general elections will occur amidst very high level of insecurity. So that's already the condition or the threat environment in which the election had to take place. So elections occurred in a challenged environment. With security forces already stretched. If you cast your mind back to maybe the Osun election or the Ekiti election, you will have heard the police say they deployed about 30,000, 40,000 policemen. But for the gubernatorial election, police deployment was about 18,000, 19,000 in some states, less than 15,000. So there was clearly not much that the security forces could do in terms of their posture, deployment, or their ability to respond, because the members of the security forces are in themselves an endangered set of citizens that we have. Because just yesterday, about 9 soldiers were ambushed somewhere in the northeast. So Boko Haram has not let up, ISWAP has not let up. The problems with ESN is also still there. So really and truly, if I say to you that the forces were stretched beyond measure, that's just almost sounding like a broken record. So the honest truth is that when we listen to the Chief of Defense Staff claim that some people will get a bloody nose, the honest truth is that GSF, government security forces, don't have the means or the wherewithal to effectively police every nuke and every cranny of this country. So there was always going to be pockets of violence, pockets of sparsely dispersed skirmishes and clashes, and all GSF will have been able to do will have been to respond and play catch up a bit. There was no way they will have been able to get a full grasp of the issue. Yeah.
It's interesting you mentioned that, because that looks like there's a failure, or basically an inopportunity to be proactive. And I ask that to say this because at the end of the day, we can look at the failures of the policing structure and we want to ask ourselves, what better approach would we have been able to employ? So we know that the Independent National Electoral Commission met several times with security agencies before the elections. And as you talked about, there were threats of those who might disrupt the elections are going to get bloody noses. There was also talk of this three-partite ring sort of approach to addressing security. So the first and innermost ring being police security deployed to the polling units who are not going to be armed. Then the second ring would be those outside, meaning the police once again, which are the major security agency that that INEC works with. And then this outer ring that would have involved the military, which is, of course, as you said, involved already in missions and campaigns in more than 30-something states as it stands now. So even if we had the potential to reimagine our security approach, it would have been very limited. But let's play what if right now, Adekoya. Reimagine how we should have really put security in place and deployed security for the elections. Also reminding ourselves that security is not always physical. There's the mentality behind it. There's the belief that you're secure that sometimes can lead to security. So let's put all of that in place and reimagine how security really should have been deployed for the elections.
Okay, so it would appear like we want to get into some conjectures now.
Yes.
And in our space, we actually don't like conjectures too much, because what you're trying to describe is what we call security in depth. Okay, you must have very deep pockets to be able to achieve security in depth, because then you look at the concentric approach, which is what you're talking about, the three-layered approach. So you take the first layer, of course, 2 unarmed policemen per polling unit would give you about 350 something, almost 360 something thousand policemen. That's a challenge. You still need to protect the over 2,000 plus contestants. And we've seen the number of assassination and threat to life of to the political contestants. In this cycle alone, I would have, at least at the last count, counted almost 8 assassinations. So these are persons in danger. You also have to provide them VIP protection. We still have critical national infrastructure to protect. We still have governors, 7 senators, we have businesses, we have manufacturing centers, we have states, we have the borders. You can already see the color of the problem, not even the size of the problem. So if we do all the what ifs, we then come back to culture. We know that culture is strategy for breakfast. Culture is everything. What's our culture, security culture like? What's security education in Nigeria like? What's the disposition to issues of national interest, to issues of national security, and to the issue of national defense? So I think that as a society, we still have a bit of a long way to go in bringing the generality of the people to that point of achieving a drill state of security. Then you then look at how we play politics. I mean, no matter how good your intentions are, I dare say that if they made you INEC chairman, I don't believe that the politicians will give you a free pass. You would have a whole lot of challenges to deal with and to confront. Much, and there's no soft landing, as it were.
Yeah. All right, so I think we're having some technical issues there with our guest, Adekoya Onyekachi, security expert, and we'll see if we can get him back in just a moment. But the conversation, hindsight, they say, is 2020, so it's very easy to sit now and look back and see how the security situation should have been handled. But there are, of course, lessons, and we hope to be able to draw those out as we continue this conversation. Adekoya, I believe you're back with me now, correct?
Yes, I'm back with you.
Fantastic. All right, let me move us to this. There have been a lot of conversations and questions about how militarized our elections are. And many people tend to wonder, why it seems elections in Nigeria become like war, become this situation where there's a restriction of movement, military is deployed outside the barracks. But at the end of the day, as you said, culture trumps everything. And we can see why, because there are cultural context to the security situation and the security conversations in Nigeria. So what lessons are there? What takeaways do you think we have that we need to look into as we head into the off-cycle elections and even into the 2027 elections and beyond? We keep promising ourselves that every election year will do better, will get better, but we still find ourselves mired in the same logistical issues, the same staff issues, and even the same security issues.
So very important, and I've been encouraging that we should take lessons from the 2023 election. I would say that the journey to 2027 starts now. We still would not get 2027 right because there are a number of societal issues that we still need to deal with first. The number of the leading candidates did campaign on the restructuring of the Nigerian police force. So until that is done, and then we institutionalize state police properly, we may not be able to achieve that security in depth, but we must start the journey from somewhere. This administration did espouse the idea of community policing, and they did something about it. But we had also warned that the community policing as constituted would fail because the idea was to have one community policing officer whose uniform was different from that of the regular police, to also have those community policing officers not armed, not paid by the federal government, not paid by the state government, but to have those people on stipends as it were, and all catered for by nobody. So that in itself was going to be a source of failure. So, I mean, we can stay here all day and do the what ifs, and I would to the positive is that Beavers has worked. Beavers has shown to be a good leveler. So we can then layer on the Beavers, on the IREF, other things around security in depth, and hoping that we can get security orientation, civic responsibility rights. I don't see us getting politicians to play fair, but in any case, in this, with the president-elect, this will be the first president-elect in the long time that was not determined for us by the military. So we're making some progress. And when you talk about the over-militarization of politics, it's even over-militarization of our security architecture as it were. Hopefully, we no longer will have an NSA who is a retired military person. Hopefully, we can take security from a policy-first approach. The 2019 National Security Strategy talks about human security. To do human security, you must get macroeconomics right. You must get the criminal justice system working. Even the criminal justice system is still not broken. It's still broken, sorry. We can't count the number of prosecutions and arrests and an effective committal to prison for political violence. For now, the incentive to political violence is still very high.
Yes.
So until we can address some of these systemic issues, and I sense that it may take us another 10 years, but we can start the journey and keep going gradually. So for this election cycle, it is Beavers. For the gubernatorial cycle, it is IREF and Beavers. Hopefully, 2027 may be Beavers, IREF, and a better security framework. We just can only hope.
Okay, so I want to extrapolate this a bit, because I think that the handling of the election security-wise can be widened to the wider security situation that Nigeria faces, whether during elections or not. And when you look at some of the numbers, when I checked, there's said to be about 371,800 police officers for a country of about 200 million people. The United Nations recommends one police officer to every 400 citizens. And if we're using the 200 million people and we do the math, that's about one Nigerian police officer to more than 537 Nigerians. So it clearly seems we're playing a game where we're hobbled with one hand tied behind our backs when it comes to security. So what do you think the handling of the election security can tell us about Nigeria's approach to its normal, unfortunately abnormal, let me use that word, security challenges?
There's not much to learn really from the elections because where would you start from really? Where do you want to start from? You want to start from the INEC's Director of Security, who has to rely on the police and the Army and the DSS and the NSCDC for support, but cannot fund their operation. Or do you want to talk about the Nigerian police that has a very mere bare bones budget? Capital capex of that budget is not up to 10%, or the Nigerian army that is short staffed. Where do you begin to start from in doing a post-mortem in terms of security? I mean, for this election, as always, Nigeria has happened to the Nigerian police force. Nigeria has happened to the Nigerian army. We're losing officers every day. We're losing soldiers. If you lose a colonel, that's a lot. Nigeria has lost the years the person stayed in the NDA, the courses the person has gone through, the years of experience. We're losing officers, even in the police service. Policemen are being shot, and there's no Medicare for them. There's no proper care for their families. So where do we start from in this whole systemic mess to begin to say why did the election security not go right? It's like trying to put something on nothing. And perhaps that's what we do the best in Nigeria. We're very aspirational. We want a Lamborghini, but the money in our pocket can only buy a downfall bus. And then we're wondering, why is the downfall not a Lamborghini? So where do we start from? Where do we start from the macroeconomic challenges that we have that is impairing our ability to do the basics of government? The primary responsibility of government shall be the security and protection of life and property. But if you don't have the means, how do you do it? You just talked about the 318,000 figures that you have. I dare say we are far below that. Where do you even see that? Our entire military forces are below 250,000, if I thought they're up to 200,000. So the NSCDC themselves can't tell you the last time they bought ammunition and arms for them. So where do we begin from is the question. So perhaps we go again to the root cause of our security problem. The successive years of military rule has seen the subjugation, as it were, of other security agencies. And the bulk of the spend we continue to give to the military. But the police should be the primary agency that has to do with internal security. Yes, this administration did separate the Ministry of Police Affairs to make it a standalone. But we've seen issues between the Police Service Commission chairman, IGP on recruitment, and then Minister of Police Affairs with the IGP. The policy has just been all over the place. The federal government is doing too much. That's why it's failing in very key and critical areas. I believe that government is best that governs little. Government in the area of security should provide an enabling environment that allows the states to become partners in security, so that the forces we have from the states and from the community can act as a force multiplier to help us gain a bit of a grasp of the issues. Before we then go to the criminal justice system, you cannot even begin to imagine the amount of cases that a single judge is sitting on. So there are a lot, except we want to begin to cry on air now. I don't know where we want to start from. I don't know where we want to begin to analyze, but I will just end with this note. The police we have, as they are constituted today, are magicians. How they do what they do beats me. It beats me completely. So when we get to a checkpoint and we're a bit harsh with them, disrespectful, not showing proper courtesy, that's someone who's working 24 hours, sometimes 2 days in, 3 days out, when ideally the man should be working on an 8 hours rotation and he should be properly relieved, even carrying a service pistol, not carrying an assault rifle. The life of our policemen today is not even what the rifle that they carry. The rifle they carry is more has more value than their lives. Wow. So people, because of the rifle, kill the policeman to take his assault rifle. And that's one father, one uncle, one husband who's not coming home.
One
So
brother
there are a number of issues, really. We can't exhaust it in one call.
Most definitely not. So Adekoya, I'll ask you this. With the issues, we've always heard that where there are problems and challenges, opportunities exist. And I'll ask you this very quickly in just a minute. Do you see opportunities that exist for us to better our security in the aftermath of the 2023 elections?
I'm paid to be a cynic. So some people pay me for my cynicism. I would love to see the opportunities, but if we continue, if we keep doing the same thing over and over again, hoping to have a different result, I don't see any light at the end of this tunnel. What should we be doing differently? We must go away very quickly from the parochial approach to security. The ideology that unless you're a retired military general, you cannot handle or deal with security. The military have done the much they can do. This is now the 21st century. Technology leads in the issue of security. The talk now is about human security. The talk now is about how can security become an enabler of economic development and economic prosperity, not a security that shuts down everything, not a security that is limiting, not a security that is myopic, not a security that is backward. So security must be forward thinking. We must inject new blood, new idea, new thinking, new approach to the issues of security. Above all, you cannot do effective security until you bring the citizen to a drilled state of patriotism, where security can be seen as a collaborative effort, not just for the government. We must, this whole issue of trust deficit between government and the governed is quite high. So yes, we may hope. After all, the president-elect has promised us renewed hope. Yes. So yes, maybe we hope. But if we don't do away with the people in khaki, the khaki people who have now changed to Agbada, and that old regimented thinking, that whole excessive seniority of forces, subjugation of other forces, where we now come to a more collaborative, a policy-driven approach to national security and human security, I don't see how we do anything differently. So maybe the hope will be we'll do something different to get a different outcome.
All right, and hope, they say, springs eternal, but in this case, it's looking like we're talking about works and not just the faith behind that. Onyekachi Adekoya, security expert and managing director, PR24 Risk Management Consulting. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.